I think you can tell a lot about a politician or a party based on the allies they keep. And in British Columbia, the BC NDP has all of the wrong allies. They're such a flamboyantly left wing party that they don't really seem to be that bothered by just flat out far left elements, both within their party as well as those outside the party, but who are supporting them. And the BC NDP's media allies have been having the worst time covering the attempted assassination of Donald Trump because for some reason, out of this moment of political violence where overheated rhetoric has very likely led to an assassination attempt, they are still upset with Pierre Poilievre and John Rustad being happy that the shooter of Donald Trump died, which I don't know why you would have a problem with that, but that's where the far left is in Canada right now. I want to read this article for you because of how wacky it is. And just know while I'm reading this how close of an ally the Tyee is to the BC NDP. This article is headlined, "What is Wrong with Canada's Conservatives?" Yes, you read that correctly. This title is wondering what's wrong with Canadian conservatives in the exact same piece that this man, Paul Wilcox, is going to have issue with conservative leaders in Canada, John Rustad and Pierre Poilievre, liking the fact that an active shooter was killed. I'm gonna read this to you effectively in full. It's mesmerizingly funny content of just how out of touch many of these left wingers, these BCNDP allies are. It reads, "How exactly did today's conservatives devolve from serious people into members of a populist cult missing basic moral principles?" Remember, this article is about them being happy Donald Trump didn't get assassinated and the shooter was killed. They are out of touch and they're part of a cult. My goodness. When Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt on Saturday, politicians were quick to condemn the attack and wish him well, even fierce political opponents. Federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre went further. Quote, "I condemn in the strongest terms the attempted murder of former President Trump today. I am relieved he is safe. My prayers are with the innocent people harmed or killed by this heinous attack," he tweeted. Quote, "I am also happy the suspected shooter is dead. Democracy must prevail," unquote. And now Paul goes back to say, "That's sick. It would be barely tolerable from a ranting right-wing uncle at a family dinner." Really? Really, Paul? It wouldn't be out of place outside of some far right uncle ranting at a family dinner that he's happy that more people didn't die, because that is what the shooter getting killed symbolizes. It symbolizes the ceasing of violence, that there wasn't going to be more bullets fired into a crowd loaded with people, where a man was hit in the head and died. So I don't know where this guy gets his ethics from, but apparently just every life is precious. Coming from people who also are radical abortion supporters, every life isn't precious. Once you start killing people, your life becomes very non-precious, at least in my mind. Moving on, he says, I'll just start over from there. "That's sick. It would be barely tolerable from a ranting right-wing uncle at a family dinner, but this was a considered public message on a major public platform, a signal of Poilievre's attitudes. No one should be quote unquote happy a 20-year-old suspect had been shot dead, especially a conservative politician who supposedly believes in the rule of law and sanctity of human life." How does it show that Poilievre opposes the rule of law by him wanting the police to shoot an active shooter? I don't know. That's a mystery you're going to have to solve for me, Paul. "The Secret Service response was unavoidable. That's their job. Anyone with a moral compass should recognize the killing was necessary, but not a cause for glee. Certainly, it's not for the family of Thomas Matthew Crooks, who are now left trying to understand how their son could go from high school grad to would-be assassin. And anyone who believes in the rule of law would hope Crooks would have been arrested and tried, not shot dead." Well, it kind of fast-tracks the punishment, considering we're not under the impression that there needs to be further justice served in terms of a courtroom of figuring out what was going on and seeing whether or not he was truly guilty or not. He was guilty. He effectively stuck his hand up and elected for himself to die there. So I don't see this being a tragic situation where justice was stolen. Justice was, and given out pretty quickly. I'm happy for it. Uh, But because we would not learn more about the causes of his actions, whether he acted alone and how he was able to come to so close to successfully carrying out a political assassination, and we would have the important knowledge at a critical moment for democracy. With crooks dead, dangerous rumors and conspiracy theories are running wild. Yes, the problem with the shooting was the conspiracy theories coming out of it. Everything from theories that Trump staged the shooting to it being a deep state plot. The very real risk is that more violence will flow from this act. Poilievre tweet also raises the question of whether the killing of other suspects will bring him happiness. Which crimes would he like to be solved with a shooting instead of a trial? BC Conservative leader John Rustad echoed Poilievre. Quote, I condemn reprehensible attempted assassination of former President Trump, he tweeted. Quote, we pray for his recovery and for the family of the innocent bystanders who lost their life at the hands of this individual, unquote. Quote, I am relieved to hear the assassin behind the heinous act is dead, unquote. Not quite as gleeful as Poilievre, but it's nonetheless disturbing that a politician would express satisfaction in the death of a young person. Again, he stopped being a young person. This really demonstrates the BC NDP frame of mind. Yes, Paul Wilcox is not a BC NDP candidate. If you look, though, at his timeline of the articles he writes, he is definitely a BC NDP ally, and he has been a full-time attack dog against the BC Conservatives. This is not a man who's somewhat a moderate, but felt like this was just too far in terms of the language Poilievre and Rustad used. He will use literally any excuse to attack the Conservatives, and this is what an excuse he used. But this demonstrates that the BC NDP inherently view everyone as a victim. The shooter, Thomas Matthews Crooks, was a young man, and that means he's a victim because he was shot. And isn't that tragic that someone died at the age of 20? The funny thing is, I haven't really noticed that the writer of this article has really said much about Trump being hit and that it's something that was horrific and that he wishes Trump the best. He said that. Other people have said it, but he doesn't said it. He doesn't say anything about the bystander that was killed. If he does say anything, it's a bit late in the article, or the other people who were hit and still in hospital. But they effectively view criminals as victims. They view like this assassin as a sort of victim because he was young. The NDP, the BC NDP's view of morality is completely warped. And I think their media allies are the ones who are capable of articulating what their view is. A lot of politicians can be a little bit dull because they're simply good, at very cheap rhetoric. They're good at campaigning, but they're not like the eloquent ones. This is the eloquent BC NDP expressing that they believe an active shooter is somehow still a victim. Anyways, moving on from here. Poilievre and Rustad's positions are dangerous and far from the historical conservative approach to state killings. The death penalty was largely ended in Canada in 1976. A bit of a tragedy in my opinion, when Parliament repealed the sentence for most crimes. But the direction was set by Conservative Prime Minister John Diefenbaker from 1957 to 1963. The court sentenced 63 people to death in his time as Prime Minister. Diefenbaker, a former defense lawyer who believed it was too easy for the state to kill an innocent person, commuted 55 of these death sentences to life sentences. Every year or so, someone had to die to show the government had not abandoned the death penalty, a move that considered politically unacceptable. Well, in a certain sense, I think Diefenbaker also probably believed in those who were being executed still, simply because, if you're a serial killer, Diefenbaker's not going to say, well, that felt a little bit too easy for somebody who maybe committed, second-degree murder in, a heat-of-the-moment thing. But if you're a first-degree murderer, I don't think Diefenbaker would have taken the foot off the gas. There was the biggest tragedy in the world was that Robert Pickton got to live out a long time in prison rather than just being executed on the spot for being the most obvious candidate for a hanging or the electric chair. But I digress. Diefenbaker, a conservative icon, what would he make of Poilievre's joy in the killing of a young man? You mean the shooting of an active shooter, not a young man. Stop calling him a young man. This is what leads to the BC NDP supporting policies where they're going to scrutinize the police for the racial backgrounds of people they arrest. If they're arresting people disproportionately too much from one demographic group, you could get investigated as an officer or a department. So David Eby has already made it clear that you're not actually supposed to be dealing out justice or trying to enforce the law as a police officer, you're there to support, so like, enforce social justice, to make sure that everything feels very equitable in the enforcement of the law. Much more importantly, what should Canadians make of this strange man's celebration of death? You seem like a bit of a strange man, Paul, if you can't actually be happy that the active shooter was taken down quickly. It's a serious question. Does Poilievre support police killings of suspects generally, or just in this case? Will he bring back capital punishment? How far will he go? This is insane. This is very much the BC NDP's view of morality and justice. And I think that you can't be confused that crime has gone up every single year that the BC NDP has been in power in British Columbia. Yes, some years go down, but it's generally along the same upward trend. It's just one year was so bad, the next year couldn't possibly be that bad, but it was still going to continue going up. But you can't be shocked that crime is as bad in British Columbia and Canada generally, because I think this man also represents what the federal Liberal and NDP are very much like on these issues. When somebody considers that an active shooter is just a young man, that's disgusting to me. That's a fringe opinion. They will try and call you fringe. This is fringe stuff. In British Columbia, very much I would say that the government is run by the left-wing fringe. People who have views of justice and morality and drug policy and taxes and spending and blah, blah, all this stuff. Very much of somebody who is maybe a 1 in 100 type of a person. Most middle-class people would consider this quite odd. But the Tyee is very much the paper that speaks to the BC NDP's more radical base. And so if you live in British Columbia and you live in Canada generally, do not vote for the Liberals, but I'm not under the impression any of you like them. But in BC, make sure you vote and donate to the BC Conservatives. People who represent the values of people like Paul Wilcox cannot be in government anymore. Wilcox, I don't really care. So if you're in BC, I have a donation link in the description below. You actually can't donate very much in British Columbia, so make sure you donate $100. You get 75% tax credit back so that we can push forward and make sure that the NDP gets defeated. David Eby actually has to go find a real job for once in his life. And John Rustad, the man who actually knows that it's right to kill active shooters, can become the premier of British Columbia. So the link for donations is in the description below if you live in British Columbia. And if you don't, I have my own legal fund also linked in the description below if you want to contribute to our fighting back against a Chinese billionaire suing us for defamation that in 2.5 years, he hasn't even been able to submit a single piece of evidence that would show that we actually have defamed him in any way, shape, or form. And then you can also sign up on my website in the description below if you want to get on my email list for different local areas, for recommendations for nomination races, municipal races, provincial, federal, all the rest. If you want to know about any volunteering opportunities, different people or movements that you can support, basically I can keep you informed even down to the smallest postal code level. That should be it for me today, guys. Have a good one.